And then I'm going to go back and I'm going to go through some specific pictures and show you the PSD files and try to explain what I did. And then toward the end, I'm going to take a look at trying from scratch to work a picture for you, or two, depending on the time. And some of you, if you're new to Photoshop or new to layers in Photoshop, by that point you might decide this is too much and got tedious, and I won't be offended if you feel like you need to leave at any point, really. But in any case, that's where I'm headed. So I've been doing textures and putting them on photographs that I take for, I think, about 6 years. It's been about 11 years that I've been taking photographs at all. And in that time, I've changed from Canon to Sony. I'm now a Sony shooter, if that matters to anybody. But the textures, I've also pretty much learned on my own. There's been a few instrumental people online that have helped me learn just by virtue of being a member online of their club or just watching what they do. But overall, I'm self-taught in both photography and Photoshop and textures. And what I notice about myself is I'm not a technically oriented person. You know, I know a lot of photographers and they're very technical. They can tell you exactly what f-stop to use here and there and the whole deal. And I'm kind of more experimental. And that's reflective in what I do with textures also. So I really don't necessarily do things the technically easiest way or anything else. I just do it my way, and that's what I'm here to show you today. So here's the overview today, and I'm going to talk about these things generally in this order. I'm going to talk about why to texturize photos at all. I'll give you several examples of my work and try to tell you how, real briefly, I did each. I mean, in terms of real briefly, and about how I use the two basic techniques that we're going to talk about today in those particular examples. There are 3 ways, maybe 4, to make your own textures. Talk about that. Where do you get textures and instruction? What types of photos would you use with the texture? What type of textures would you use with a particular photo? The reverse. I'm going to go over the 2 basic techniques of putting a texture over your photograph or putting a texture under. And there's lots more ways that I use of putting the texture over the photo than under, but you can do under. And of course, you can do both on a given photograph if it works out that way. Then I'll work 1 or 2 photos from scratch as time permits, and I'm going to send you all, if you want them, you'll be able, Fred will help me figure out how we're going to let you download a bunch of free textures. Over time, I've collected millions of, literally, of textures. And some of them I use more than others, of course, but I thought I'd give you a smattering of the free ones. There are ones you will see today that you might like better, but the problem is I've paid for them, and I can't give you ones I paid for, but I can tell you probably where I got them, and if you're interested, you can go buy them too. So, and then at the end, we'll have questions, and I'll try to stop periodically and talk about, and let you, ask some questions through the chat. These are the samples that I'm going to talk about now, and I guess I'll say why I texture photos right now, and that is it's about processing in Photoshop, and I've always kind of found that fun. Not everybody does. If you're the kind of person that wants to take your photo and do a couple little, contrast, sharpen, that kind of stuff in Photograph and in Photoshop and be done with it, then you're not probably going to like texturing. I work the picture pretty slowly, and sometimes I just go back and change on the fly. I don't necessarily use the history panel. I just say, oh, whoops, I did that, and I'm looking at it going, nope, I don't like it. So it may take me a while just to work one photo, but to me, it's fun. It's a creative outlet. To me, it makes the photograph more artistic. And overall textures, I think, create a sense of depth and tactility to your picture. So this one, I can tell by looking at it that I probably blurred the background and selected the flower and pasted it on top and then put a texture on top of that. This one is strictly a texture over a photograph that I colorized so that it was all kind of the similar colors. This one is a texture over where I might have removed a little bit of the texture from on top of the bird using a layer mask. There's a big old alligator from Florida. And this one has two textures. There's a texture under and a texture over. This is, I believe, a texture over only. This one is one of my more recent ones where I'm using blurred backgrounds from the photo that I took. And this one is a texture over and under using a layer mask to remove it from the top layer. This is a texture under where I cut out the bird from the picture by selecting the bird and pasting it on top of the texture. This is a macro shot of a dandelion, and I believe this one is a texture that I put over but brought it back in certain places. This one has a texture under, and I recolorized it. This one is a more recent picture too. This one, I believe, is a texture under and over. This is an older picture. I'm trying to put in, by the way, a variety. I tend to do a lot of flowers and a lot of birds because that's what I, usually take pictures of in Florida, for one. But, that's not to say that you can't texturize a landscape. And here's an example of that. That's a texture over only. This is something that I did, and I put the texture I put the texture under, and then I had to remove some of or move it over I put the bird over the top, and then I removed some of the texture later. This is an interesting picture because some people will tell you, and it's probably overall a good idea to, if you are going to texturize a photograph, the original photograph that you've processed should be pretty good to begin with, and don't expect to fix, quote unquote, a photograph by texturizing it. However, this is a picture that actually flies in the face of that a little bit. I was on a drive home from Illinois, and I saw this car in front of, on the grass, really, at someone's farmhouse. And I literally pulled off the side of the road and jumped out and held my camera and took a bunch of shots so that I could do an HDR. This was, and as many people know, I used to do a lot of HDR a long time ago. But anyway, so I jumped back in the car and went on my way. When I got home, I realized when I put the picture together that it was a little fuzzy. I was hand holding to take these shots, so therefore the it just wasn't quite lined up. But I thought, well, what can I do with this? So I messed around with it for a while, and then I came up with throwing this texture on it. And this actually won an award at a photo show down in Florida. So anyway, my point is that it can happen that the picture you thought was not going to be good can be made better with texture, but it might not fix a picture. It just depends on what the problem is, I guess. This is a recent texture. There's texture under and over this one. This is a picture of a sand art statue made in Florida, and this is actually just one texture over. This is one of my favorite birds, a pelican. Down in Florida, people think of pelicans like they think up here of geese. They're not too fond of them. But this is a texture over where I removed some of the texture from the bird. This is an older picture too, and this is texture over primarily. Okay, so what is a texture really? Well, it's just a file that is a JPEG, or it could be a TIFF or whatever, but it's just a created digital image, and you use it as a layer in your editing program. And that might be Photoshop, like in my case, but it could be GIMP. It could be, I think even now, I'm not that familiar with Lightroom, but if there are layers in the program, On One, I think, has layers now, Topaz, some of these other programs you can certainly use for textures. How do you make a texture? Well, you can take a photo of a real world texture in your camera and just use it. You can make a texture. There's a gal named Kim Clayson online, and I have that name for you later, that makes textures out of basically using plaster, paint, tea staining, canvases, and then photographing those. Or you can digitally paint a texture, which is something that I do. This is an example of a picture I took of a rusty trash bin in a junkyard, and that's a texture for an example of one you photograph. Again, handmade textures are for people who like to get messy. You can use twigs, you can, use plaster, put imprints in things, and then take a picture of it. It's time consuming, it costs money, it's messy, and that's why I use other kinds of textures. I like free ones. A lot of people who sell their textures will, if you get on their mailing list, will give you a couple like every once in a while. So I have collected those. This is an example of the handmade texture. It's made of plaster, and she's put paper in it and that kind of thing, and then finished it by taking a picture of it to use it on her photos. The digitally painted textures, you can, if you go to Flickr, this is where I start, the website, you will find that there various people are making textures there and putting them up there. And if they're not using them as a repository for their own work, they might be willing for you to download. You can ask them, or you can see what the licensing is for their pictures. Creative Commons license is the most typical, but you have to give them credit. So you got to watch it when you do that, though. You can paint your own digitally. I use Corel Painter or Photoshop, or you can buy them and download them. The size of them, they're usually pretty good sized, maybe 6,000 by 8,000 pixels. This depends. When I make them, that's about how big I do it. But it needs to be about the same size in terms of pixels as your photograph to let them blend well together. This is a digitally hand-painted texture that I created in Corel Painter. Again, Photoshop will work to do this if you have it. Here's some sources of free textures, and I know I can read these to you, but you can read them too. And most of these people want you to buy their textures, but we'll give you a few now and again. Design Cuts is a website that hosts a bunch of people's work. French Kiss and Flypaper textures are two, I think, are remarkable ones from Design Cuts. I mentioned the Flickr website. If you get online and you Google free digital textures for Photoshop, you're going to find all kinds of resources. So there's textures are plentiful. It's really in the organizing that's helpful, and I have not done that. So anyway. And certain programs contain their own textures, like On One or Topaz. By the way, I'm willing, Fred, to give this PowerPoint presentation in note form to you to hand out to people or to give out to people, so that you can have, you don't have to write this down right now if you don't want to.
So afterward, I will save the files to a Dropbox and send everybody a link so they can download those files that you're making available.
Okay, good. Okay, so I just wrote out some of the general concepts here about basic texturizing in Photoshop. And, like we mentioned before, you need an understanding of layers. Blending modes, you kind of need to look at those and see which ones work best. There are certain ones that definitely work better than others. Using opacity slider, and I should say sliders, there's one that affects the texture and one that affects the brush. So there are two to know where those are. Layer masks, you know where layers are, but using layer masks for texturing is helpful. Determining the focal point and making a selection of the subject, which is a Photoshop skill, is important to be able to do. And overall, you know, you may, you know, as you went through those pictures earlier and we were looking just now, you know, there may be some you didn't really like, and there may be some you thought were fine, you know, but the bottom line is it's all about what you like, about your eye and your taste and creating art. And frankly, it's taken the 6 years for me to get to where I am today with just that part of it. Kind of trying to take a look at what I like and what makes me happy. And if it happens to make other people happy, that's good. But I want to stress that because, you know, I've submitted things to shows before where, you know, the focus was on, and I didn't get it, I didn't know it or understand it at the time, but it was on, you know, realistic photography. And so when I come up with this texturized stuff, they look at me like I had 3 heads 6 years ago. Now I don't think I think it's more understood. But just so you know that if you're going to submit something to a show, then just be sure you know their criteria. You need to know how to pick out a texture for the photo and the reverse. And this is an introductory class. I'm going to share this slide with you. It will be in the presentation, so you'll get it later, and we'll try some of these out so you'll see what blending modes do. This is a nice chart to help you to, you know, kind of understand that if you choose the first two, you'll probably never use dissolve, at least very rarely will you use dissolve. But the next set of 5, they darken the photograph overall in some way. The next ones lighten it. The next ones are dealing with the contrast of the photo. And then the other ones are comparative and then components. So primarily the ones that we are going to use and you'll use in texturing most often are the ones in yellow: multiply, screen, overlay, and soft light. I've used pin light with some success also. And sometimes we'll get hard light will work. But anyway, those are the ones that are most typically helpful. I'm also putting this up here. I don't generally look at a color wheel when I pick what, you know, what texture I'm going to use or whatnot. However, if you're not familiar with the color wheel, I put one here because I like this one. It gives you an understanding that the complementary colors are directly across from each other, like red and green, yellow and I guess purple, and so forth. And then the monochromatic colors are right next to each other. So the point being, it is certain colors kind of evoke a certain mood, and you'll see the mood on the outside of that circle, if that might help anybody to have access to the color wheel. Okay, here's some last tips, but we'll talk about some more as we go. The main thing is to practice this. Practice it and do it and do it and do it and pick different kinds of pictures and see what you like to do and what works best. By the way, I would mention, I thought of this later after I wrote this, if anybody wants to try this and either, you know, is willing to email me their file to look at or a version of it or something, and to get some feedback, I'd be happy to do that. Your first attempts might be awful, but that's all right. Again, experiment, and that's very important. You know, again, if you like it, that's what counts. Use layers, masking, blend modes, different types of textures, and then experiment some more. And this is something I didn't do, this next one. And I probably would have sped myself along a little better if I had realized that when I did something I really liked, I should take notes, because then you can do it again. Have fun, be creative. Photography doesn't have to be realistic all the time. And I included my website at the bottom here. All right, so here's a sample that I have done already, but you should be able to see over here on the right, the layers that I used, and this is the PSD file. So the first question is always, what photo to use. And basically photos that have a clean, non-distracting background, photos that have a clear focal point, or you can process it to create a focal point too. So the subject can be about anything, a flower, a barn, a bird, or in this case, it's a landscape. I don't find texture is the best choice for people, but if you do it carefully, keeping the texture off of their face, um, that could probably be done. It just depends. The subject you have needs sort of a base to it. In this case, the base of the mountain, or the scene has a base or a bottom, I guess. The photo should generally be sharp. Don't totally expect to fix a poor photo. Bright spots or modeling isn't going to work too well in your photo. You want you don't want a whole bunch of bright spots in the leaves, say, behind your photograph of your flower. What types of texture to use with your photo? One thing you can do is look at examples from other people and try to determine what you like, and then explore how to do it. Some textures go better with some subjects. Old books go with, say, leather, paper, rustic, or even cracked textures. Metallic objects might go with an oxidized rust texture. Canvas textures tend to go with almost any photo. The bolder the texture, the more limited its application, and the more you need to know about blending it in. All choices are dependent upon the mood you want to create and how much background you think you want or need to cover. All right, so this picture was taken when I was in Montana last summer. This is the original process picture, and that, I want to emphasize that you want to process your photograph first before you even think about applying a texture. So this one has been processed already. The next thing I did, and I'm going to just go up the layers and show you what happened each step if I can. This next step, I just copied the layer. I don't always do this. I know they tell you to do that or make your photo into a smart object and all that stuff. I don't do it. I'm not going to make any excuses for it. I just don't do it. This next one is the adding of the layer. If I click on that layer, you will see up here that this is where the blending mode is. And I've got this in an opacity. The texture itself is at an opacity of 72% with the multiply blending load. And then I used a brightness and contrast adjustment layer, and which brought out this texture here in the sky a little bit more. This is an example of a texture over a photograph, and those are the kind we're gonna kind of look at here today first. I usually, I end up making mistakes as I go, and then I just stop and I try to redo them. That's why I don't really generally make a layer copy. But if you're not, maybe I don't want to say as confident, but you feel more comfortable, please do make a copy of your layer so that you're not destroying your original photograph. Fred, I'm going to stop here a second and just see if there are any questions in the chat. I don't know.
Well, I just answered one, Nancy. The question was, where should we send our practice files for feedback? And my response was that we will send an email out with the link to this video, a link to the texture, and it will include your email address.
Yeah, that's fine. That's absolutely fine. That's the other question.
No, but I do have a question myself, Nancy. The layer 1, which is the texture.
Yeah.
Could you show me what happens if you move the opacity left or right on that layer?
For layer 1, oh, this one where I'm on?
Yeah, not show the opacity going, show how to move the opacity left and right there.
Sure, it's at 72. If I put it up to 100, it looks like this. And if I, slowly, what I do is I slowly drag it down and get it to, it starts coming in at 100%. Well, okay, I'm going to use this picture because you have all seen it and show you a little bit about it. And I'll back this all up so you can see what's going on. Again, this was the original picture that I took, and I proceeded to copy the layer. I added this particular texture with a layer mask. If you're following with my little finger thing over on the right by the layers, it shows what I did. I took the layer off of the layer mask, or took the texture, excuse me, off of the picture by adding a layer mask. Now here, Fred, is what I don't want to mess up my picture too much, but what I want to show you is that right here is another opacity slider up at the top. And if I'm on any of the tools, but most specifically the brush tool that we would use, I would be on the layer mask, not on the texture, on the mask. And I would adjust the opacity of my brush so that it can tell how much of the texture to take off. Okay, and I'll have to demonstrate that a little bit more. But this is another example of a texture over, where I'm putting it over the photograph, and then I'm masking out the by the part of the texture I don't want by bringing the flower back in. There's a couple ways to do that, but in essence, that's what I did in this particular one. Okay, let me get another one here. Okay, this is just a different kind of photo. It's not a flower, it's a bird. I'm not really happy with this particular photograph. I don't think it's nearly as sharp as I wanted it to be. But in any case, that's the photograph I started with. I did not make a copy of it. Then I added the texture, did the same idea. Here's the mask, okay, and I put it over the bird, and then I masked out the texture over where the bird is, and then this layer is just me combining, and I think looks like I added a little more contrast to the image.
Nancy, why would you mask over the bird? Why would you want to remove the texture from the bird?
Okay, well, if I don't, I won't see the bird, I'll see the texture. That's all I'd see. Does that make sense?
And it allows more details of the bird to be more clear. It's your subject, right?
The bird is the subject. And, I ought to say maybe why I picked this texture. If you look down at the bird's feet in the original photograph here, I kind of missed as far as getting the feet in the shot. So what I did, in terms of fixing that and wanting to use the picture, because I like the way the bird was generally, the way he looked overall, his position, I guess I should say. Then when I added this, it gave me kind of a water look, it looks as if he's standing in water. It doesn't even necessarily, you don't realize he's flying, other than the fact you saw the original picture. I don't know if I can, let me see something here.
So I kind of noticed, since I've not done this myself, but on the edges of the subject, you blend a lot more. Like the feathers aren't as sharp at the very tips.
That's absolutely right. And that is part of my technique when I do this. I'll do one for you, Fred, at the end. And you will see that yeah, you have to, and those are judgment calls, how much of the bird over here do I want to sort of blur? It's usually the edges. I'm very, very careful about eyes of animals, birds, whatever, because you want those always to be sharp. So that's what's kind of going on there. Bird. Okay. This is a glossy ibis, in case you're interested. But again, let's see if I can show you. This is the original picture. It's an in-flight shot. And I started tweaking it a little bit as I go up the layers in terms of the color, in terms of, and then I got that. And then I think it was contrast, or I can find out real quick. It was a hue correction there, and I got that. And then I added the texture over, just like we've been doing. And I got that. And then I combined all of these layers together to get that. And the key combination, and I'll tell you it again later too when we do it, but it's Command Option Shift E. And those, I hold them down as I press those, and then it will combine or basically merge all the layers that I have selected and throw it up at the top. So that's what this layer is here when I turn it on. Okay, and then I added another layer, and this layer, it really started as a different color, this texture layer. I just decided I wanted it to be pink, and I corrected it in a different file. You won't see the corrections here, but I corrected it in the way I kind of thought, well, I want a little bit more pink going on. And then I brought it in, and I got that, and then I added another layer. So I added this example because it's an example of where there were three texture layers used in this photograph. It's the same masking idea, masking out this texture so you can see the bird, and then combining all those layers into this merged layer, and then adding two textures. And each of these, this is on overlay. It's not just sitting there. It's on overlay at 100%, and this one is a blending mode soft light at only 35%. Now if you like, I can show you going from 35 to 100. You all might like that better, and that's okay too. Changing to this layer, maybe I don't want it at 100%. Bring it down and decide what you want it to be. Okay, here's another one. This is an iris. Let's look at the layers real quickly here. This one is the original photo. And by the way, I took this with an iPhone. So you don't have to have the, most deluxe camera in the world to do it. I added the texture on top. And if we select the layer, we'll see that it's just normal. That's what the layer looked like at 100% opacity. And then I did it again. So I doubled up on it because I wanted more of that. And what I did here, it started with the first layer, actually. These are a little bit out of order because I selected the flower. Now, if I turn off the textures underneath it, you'll see this. If I turn that bottom photograph off, you'll see that I selected the flower. Okay, and I ended up starting with the photograph, selecting the flower, Control or Command, I guess it's Command J, will take the selection to this new layer up here. And then I knew I wanted to change the background. So this is really an example of under and over. This particular finished product here is 2 layers of texture under the photograph. So when I put them in between here, in between this flower and the original. And then I decided, you know what? I like this texture. So I added that over. And then this last one, all I did was change the contrast a little bit and slap my name on it. And that's an example of that one. So this photograph has 2 textures under and 1 over. Okay, this is a fairly recent photograph. And I believe that I was using a gray, 50% gray to sharpen here. And I did it here. Basically, this is the photograph. Let me turn these off again so you can see it. This was the photograph. This was taken up in the house with a light box and white background. And this layer just sharpened it. The next layer, I added a texture. This one is another texture. And you can see I used a layer mask to get rid of the texture over the flowers and so forth that I wanted to show. And this one is where I merged all these 4 layers into this. And then I think I sharpened it again, and then I put my name on it. And by the way, putting my name on it down here, that's a logo that I purchased.
I'll include a link to Photo Logo, which is where I'm pretty sure you got that.
Yeah, thank you. That that makes sense. Photo logo, right? Again, let me turn off the layers except for the photograph. This was the photograph. I think I can tell from looking at it that I might have selected this and then inverted it to select the background so that I could blur the background a little more than it already was. I probably did that. Then I added this yellow texture and mask out where I didn't want it on the flowers. I added this texture and did the same thing. And I did both of these manually. There is a way to copy like this layer onto the next layer if you wanted to, but these were done manually. Then I added this layer, and I should probably show you. This is on multiply 100%. I'll go back to this and show you. I'm sorry. This is normal 100%. This one is hard light 96%. And this is at multiply 100. I'm looking right here in this line to show. Once I select the layer, I can see those figures. And then I've combined these 4 bottom layers into this next one. And there's something called, Kim Clayson talked about magic layer. And the magic layer is this black one. And what it is if you look at my layer, it looks primarily black with a little bit of white, the scratchings and things. But if you put it on the screen blending mode, and this one's at 100%, it ends up that everything that was black is transparent and everything that was white is black. If you use the screen blending mode, it's just a little trick. So if you want to put text onto a picture, you can do it that way. I'm going to turn this one off and turn this one on. And this, you notice, is mostly white with black text. It's the opposite of that one. So what I did is I put it on, here's the blending modes. I put it on darker color with an opacity of 19% because I didn't really want it to overpower the flower. And I actually put I think I put these 2 on this particular picture that already had text on it, like that, because that's what I wanted it to look like. But I added these 2 just to show you what a primarily white or what a primarily black texture would do to a photograph. Okay, so most of these have been textures over. I think we had one that was texture under and over. All right. This one would be an example of just texture under. I worked it just specifically for this presentation because I didn't have one where I was sure it was just under. But what happened here, real briefly, is I have the photograph, and this is a process photograph, okay? I took this texture and I actually change the color of it. This is not the photograph, the texture's original color. But you can do that by, just opening your adjustment layers and going into the color, hue, and saturation adjustments and making the texture any way you want it to be. to change it to be. So I changed it to this. I wanted it to be more green. It was actually more pink. I selected the flower originally and created the layer with just the flower on it. You can see that if I turn these off. So when I brought my texture in, I put it in between so that it's under the flower. And then this is just the combined finished piece where I slap my name on there. So that's just one that's done specifically with a texture underneath the selected part of the photograph. You know, the way I'm getting my photos through Bridge. I use that in Photoshop if you're not familiar with that. The texture, when you open a texture file in the middle of your process of working your picture, it opens in its own separate file. And so you've got both of them going in Photoshop, and that's why I can change make the adjustments to the texture. That's just how I do it. Deciding which texture to use, you know, I look at the colors in the photo, what's the main one or two colors, and I try to find a texture that kind of goes with this, whatever my subject is, and whatever colors are in the photo. But the questions I ask myself are things like, you know, will this texture overwhelm my subject too much? One of my first big mistakes when I started this was to put a texture over the photograph. And, you know, I might adjust the opacity of that texture layer, and that's all I do. So, you know, if it was somebody's face or something, flower or whatever, you know, the texture would be on that thing as well, on your focal point as well. And that doesn't always work really well, especially if you're doing any kind of animal, because you want to make sure that nothing is distracting. Texture, you don't want it to distract from your photo. You want it to blend with the subject and with your photo. I'll open a texture for you in my Dropbox. Well, let's see. Where is it? Okay. Okay. I'm just going to pick something, you know, try to find. I'm not really going to worry about this being, once you'll be able to see it mostly. All right. I'll pick that one just for fun. Okay. So here it is, and you can see it's in its own file up here. This is the one I was showing you over here. It's got its own set of layers. If I could please get this thing to work. And over here is just my texture I opened. All right. Got my layer. I want to go up here. Now, my Photoshop may look different than yours. I don't think it looks much different than Bob Wilcox's, because he taught me how to do this. He doesn't necessarily know it, but he did. So I have layers here for the texture. There are none. It's just the texture. I'm going to go to the adjustment layer. And remember that my flower, I had a lot of green and the flower was blue. So if I go right here, it's the hue and saturation layer. You can see it when I hover over it. The title of what I'm on is right up above it. So let me open that, and let me drag the hue slider until I have a little more blue and green, if I can. Well, there's a little more green. And I'll just go with that for now. Okay, I'm going to come back over here to my layers. Now you can see that I've created a hue and saturation layer. I'm going to select both of these, and then I'm going to combine them. And I'll go slower with this because I know I'm going fast, but I'll show you in a minute. You want to select the texture. Now, if you look at it, what I did is I use the key commands, Command A, which selects it. You can see the marching ants around here. Okay, I know it's selected. And I'm going to copy it, just like copy and paste text on a document. You know, I do Command C, and then I come over to my picture, okay? And now I paste it in. I go Command V, which is paste, and just say okay. And there it is. Now, look over here where it came in. It was because I was on this layer, I think. Let me just put it at the top. Now it'll be over. Why does it come in the middle? Well, because it's not sized yet. Up here is your move tool in Photoshop. And I grab the texture by the corner and I hold down the shift key anymore. So that's a new thing, I guess. I don't know, but anyway, you move it with the shift key held down and it takes off the constraints. You can shape it any way you want. Hit return or enter when you've got it where you want it. And here I am on this layer. Now you can't see anything. You can't see my flower. Even though I've got a texture under it and all this nice stuff, this texture, the second texture here, covers it up. What do I need to do about that? Well, I can change the opacity of it. You know, I can get clear down here. Here's 28%. I might like that, you know, and that's fine. But notice that the texture is on the flower too. I've got these nice water drops I sort of like, and I've got a pretty clear, crisp center to these flowers. So I'm not really wanting to make that quite that soft, nor have the texture on it. So what can I do about that? Well, first of all, let's look at the background and get the texture how you want it to show up. Forget the flowers for a minute. Look up here and see what you think. If you like that, leave it at whatever opacity. Okay, I'm going to leave it at 70. And now I'm going to create a layer mask, which means I'm going to get some of that texture off of the flower. To do that, make sure you have the texture layer selected and come way down to the bottom. I'm going to get rid of that thing. You don't need it. Way down to the bottom here. And this little rectangle with a black circle in the center is the layer mask. So click on it. Now I've got a layer mask. And what I want to do is, like I said, take that texture off the flower. So I'm going to notice that my layer mask is white. White means reveal what is here, what on this layer. And right now, you're seeing the layer mask, all of it. I've got a little lower opacity is all. But I don't really, what I want to do then is come over here. I don't want to use white to paint. I'm going to paint with the brush tool, which is right there. I don't want to paint with white on my layer mask, which is where I'm going to paint to get this stuff off of the flower. So I paint the opposite color. I'll paint black. And black will remove some of this mask, and I'm not doing it yet, I'm just showing you, so that it takes it off the flower. Now up here controls the opacity of my brush. Over here we control the opacity of the layer. It's a very important difference if you're not aware of that. I'm sure most of you are. Right now my opacity is set at 26%. Now, the problem with doing it this way, there are other ways, by the way, to do this. There's a zillion ways. I could start with black and let the flower show and bring in the amount of texture. You can, for right now, this is generally the way I do it. And so I'll just show you that. But anyway, so I'm going to paint with black, but I can't really see the flower very well. So you know what? I'm going to change this opacity some more of the texture. Now I can see the flowers a little bit, right? So now I know where to paint. 26% opacity, painting with black, and here I go. As I paint, now it's hard to see, but I'm removing the texture by using the layer mask to do so. And I go around once. This is basically how I do it. I go around once, and I'm at 26% opacity. If I release my tool and then click again, and start painting, I always start at the center of the flowers because I know that I want those to really show up, okay? And then I might go out here and give a little more to some of this. Now, this is not the way the picture looks. What you see right now is not the way it looks. And how do I know that? Because the opacity is at 30%. Let's take this all the way up and see what happened. Can you see there's a little more flower showing through, but not very much. Now, you can reduce the opacity, or you can keep using this brush tool on black and remove some more. And if it's not going fast enough for you, you know, if you're not taking enough of it off You can certainly raise this opacity. If I go a little higher, 38, it'll go do this a little bit quicker. But you got to be careful, because remember Fred said, hey, hey, you're leaving some on the sides there of each petal and all that stuff, you have to make decisions about how far out do I want to go. Now I'm going to purposely make a big boo-boo here. I'm going to take this petal of the flower and I'm going to go way out here and take all the texture, a lot of texture, I don't know about all, but a lot of texture off of that. Okay. And I might like that, and that's fine. But if I don't, to correct it, all you do is come over here and change back to white. Remember, black reveals, revealing the flower, and white conceals. So all I really need to do now to correct it is change back to white and brush around some more. And now this is when sometimes I change the size of my brush, and I come in here and I just make it a little bit softer around the edges. Okay, and here, I may not like the edges at all. And if I don't like the edges at all, this is probably a more advanced technique, but I'll explain it anyway. I can come down here to my first, well, either this one or this layer of texture, and we'll use this one since that's what we're doing. And I can use my clone tool. And if I'm on this particular layer, this is the tricky part. If you're not on the right layer, it screws it up. But here I'm on the layer, not on the mask. This is the difference. I'll let you watch this. Here I'm on the texture. Here I'm on the layer mask. And we were just working on the layer mask before. But now I'm on the texture with a different tool, the clone tool. And this is a little bit more advanced. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to select the color I want to clone, and I'm selecting it from the texture, and then I'm painting. I can paint it. Let's see here. I think I can paint. I have to get off of there, paint it back onto the picture. You see it coming in on the picture. It's not as great as I'd like. I'm not taking a lot of time, but I can hide some of the edges of that by using the clone tool on a specific layer of texture and bringing it on top again. It's like you're putting more on top. But that's the basic idea. So I think I'm about ready to work a regular picture from scratch here. Okay, so here's my photograph. Let me get rid of some of this stuff here for a second. Sorry, I want to get a clean screen for you, basically. Okay, so here's my photograph. Here he is over here on the layers. It's a background, and I like to change this to a layer. All I did is double click, and it'll change the name to layer O. If I wanted to change, today I'm going to do this for people. So this is the photo. This is the process photo. It's ready to go. I've spent time, making adjustments. Maybe I've cloned out some stuff. Again, I'm trying to get get a picture that I have a relatively easy to identify subject. I've tried to get a good background. This one's interesting because there's sort of a diagonal going on with the green through here. This is a peony, my neighbor's, and this is an iPhone photo, by the way. So you want to think now, okay, I'm going to put a texture. I'm going to use textures. What do I want to do? I want to think about the mood I want to create, what kind of texture I want to use, what kind of texture effect do I want to happen, what kind of background effect would you like to see happen on this photo. And I don't verbalize this when I work a picture, so I don't know exactly if I'm going to be able to verbalize everything to you, but I'll certainly try. Sometimes what happens is I'll find or I'll buy a new texture and I just try it. I try it on the picture and I see, hey, is that going to work pretty good? Or I just give it a try. If I don't like it, oh well, I'll just delete it and try something else. Let me point out the tools again. I said I would do this kind of slow, but I did point out most of the tools in Photoshop that you're going to use. But let me do that. Um, you have your tools palette running down the left side here. And mainly you're going to use the brush tool, which is right there. It looks like a little brush. Or you're going to use the move tool, which is at the very top of the screen. On your keyboard, I use several different commands. It's always usually the command key. Command A selects around the whole picture. Command C copies it, whatever you selected, and Command V, as in victory, Command V pastes it. Command J, which I'll do right now, does that. It makes a copy of your layer right here. Okay. Okay, here's the move tool, by the way, up here. You need to know where the add mask to the layer button is. It's down at the very bottom of this layers panel. The opacity sliders I mentioned before up here, right here. You can put in a number, you can click down and move the slider, or you can do that and just drag. But the opacity for the layer is up here, as well as the blending modes for that, whatever layer you're on. They're all right there. I just opened it up right using that drop down arrow. And then I mentioned the other thing I mentioned was the merge layer. When you get this all figured out up here and you're done, you select all the layers. And to select all the layers, and there are other easier ways, but I've always done it this way. I hold the command key down and just select. If there are more layers, whatever, I just select them all. And then I use Command Option Shift E, and it'll merge them all together and put the copy at the top of your layers. I use that. You can use Command E. If you use Command E, you will it will merge them just like before, but you won't be able to see your layers anymore. So I always use the Command Option Shift E way of doing that. You want to do most of your adjustments to the texture before you place it on a photo. The layer mask, you need to know, a layer mask, white reveals, black conceals. It's very important. If you want a stronger texture and the opacity of that texture is already 100, just duplicate that texture layer. And to do that, that's Command J. At the end of the picture, I use levels a lot to tweak the contrast, or you can use the curves, anything that you want to use that you're familiar with, really. Or you could even throw it back into Camera Raw and readjust it again. So let's do this one. Here we go. All right. Here I've got my peonies. I have not, honestly, all I did was work this picture. I have no idea what I'm going to do here today. So I'm going to choose to open a texture. And here they are, textures main, and the ones that are red dotted here are actually ones that I have paid for. So you notice there's a lot of them in here, and there aren't that many that I have paid for, actually. A lot of them are free. You just have to look, Let's see what these are. Now, the first thing I'm thinking is when I look at that texture, I just picked it. I didn't really even look at it too much. This is pink, green, and white. Now here we got red, yellow, and blue. And I'm not so sure that would look so good because of the color it is, but I could change that. The other thing I notice about that texture is it's a really heavy duty, kind of dark texture, kind of overpowering. And really those kind, to me, seem to work better in the background, with the flower or whatever it is on top. So although you could do it and just put it on there and see what happens, I'll do that just for fun. We'll just open this one. I'm going to select it, Command A. You see the marching ants. Okay, then I'm going to copy, Command C, I'm going to come back to my peony. Here I'm on the texture. Here I'm on the peony. And then I'm going to say Command V, which pastes it in here. All right, it's just, there he is. Now, again, he comes in the wrong kind of size there. He's a big texture, but I need the move tool, and I'm going to make it the right size to cover the whole photo by holding the shift key, dragging this texture where I want it to go. And then when I get it where I want it to go, I usually, by the way, overlap a little bit because I want to make sure it covers the whole photo. I've made that mistake before. Got too close to the edge and then found out I didn't quite cover what I wanted to cover. So anyway, once you get it where you want it to be, hit return. Now, the first thing I check, I go up here, select the layer, the texture. I'm on the move tool, is why you're seeing those handles. Okay, I'm on the texture. Go to normal, which is where the blend modes are. And let's just go down and look at them. Here it is with darken, multiply. See, I sort of like that, but I'll tell you, I don't like it that dark, and we can fix it. Color burn, oops, linear burn, darker color. And this is honestly how I do it. I go through these and go, okay, what do I like here? What do I like? And I always keep a couple things in mind. Number one is I can adjust the opacity of this layer, this texture, once I pick a blend mode. And so maybe it's just a little too much. And so I can take it down in opacity. Or I know if I cover up the flowers too much, I can use a layer mask and get some of it off of there, off of just specific spots. Here's lighter color, here's overlay, soft light, hard light, vivid light, linear light, pin light, hard mix, difference, exclusion, subtract, divide, hue, saturation, color, and luminosity. Now, remember back in the beginning when I showed you the keynote presentation, I said there are certain ones that seem to work better, and generally speaking, and those would be multiply. Screen works for, the black thing I was telling you about, but sometimes it works nicely as well to make your photos, especially like flowers like this, kind of soft. The other one would be overlay, soft light. I have used linear light and pin light before, but those are the ones, most typically that I use. Okay, now I happen to have a preference. I'm going to look at multiply, but I'm going to try to take this opacity down just a little bit and see what it does. And honestly, I kind of like that. Now this is texture over, you can see, because it's up here, up on top, and I've been adjusting it to affect this. It only really affects the photo under it, or the layer right under it, by the way, these modes. Okay, so I don't know, I kind of like it, but for the sake of this demonstration, I'm going to go get something else and just put another photo or another texture on it. This time I'm going to go somewhere else here and get a texture. Okay. Thank you for your patience, everybody. I feel like I should going faster, but okay. And here, in my files here, I can, I happen to be able to look and see what's here and get a little bit of a idea of what I might choose. And in this case, I'm sort of going for something a little lighter because that one was such a dark texture. And our flower was pink. But let's say I open this one. And the thing I don't like about this texture is it's not quite the right color pink. It's got a little bit too much orange. Now, I kind of did that fast, but what I did is I brought it in here, and then I went to adjustments and decided to colorize it. Whoopsie. There we go. And I'm going to take the hue slider and slide it around and see if, now looks like it's getting yellow, or here's a little bit more pink. And I think I like that better. So this is what I mean about adjusting a texture before you actually even put it in your photo, in your layers with your photo. So to copy the whole thing, I have to select both of these and then use my Command Option Shift E to make this. Now I can do what I did, select it, copy it, and paste it. And I hope it comes in this time. There we go. Okay, if I turn on the move tool, I can see the handles of this particular texture and know that, I might want to adjust it a little bit, and holding the shift key will let me drag it where I need it to be without constraints. Okay, hit return to tell the computer, okay, that's where I want it. And now I'm going to come up here again, and I'm going to start looking at these blend modes. Now, some of them are going to bring out the texture more than others. Okay, I'm just going down the line. You all probably have a lighten is making it's making the texture light. I like the darker ones this time better than the lighter ones. Here we have overlay, which is a typical one that that looks pretty good. I'm just getting the handles off. Did I switch? Okay. Overlay, soft light, hard light, these are the contrast ones. And these kind of go crazy, and these kind of go crazy. So I said I like the dark ones a little bit. You may not. You might prefer overlay. I think actually overlay looks pretty good all by itself. What I do when I'm finished, I select all the layers and I apply Command Option Shift E. And there's my picture at the top. And I go to the brush tool and I change from the soft, I've been painting with a soft round brush like this. And I go and get my signature. Well, okay, get off. Oopsie, sorry about that. There. And I'm using bracket keys. Left bracket makes it smaller, right bracket makes it bigger. I'm going to pick a color, and I usually like, just me, I like to pick something out of the photograph, and then I usually make it a little bit less bright. And there's my signature. You can see I've made this really big, so it's the pointer thing affects that too. Okay, so there's our picture we worked today.